go.
Good afternoon, Sarah. Good afternoon, Becky. How are both of you?
All right. So greetings. I see a couple of you guys rolling in. Just as you come in, if you want to throw like your name, general location, agency you work at, if applicable, into the chat, just so we can get an idea kind of who's here today. That'd be cool. We're going to wait a couple more minutes to see if anyone else decides to join us. And then I'll pass it over to Charles. Couple more folks coming in. Kind of just as you come in, just name, general location, agency you work at, if applicable, just give us an idea of who's here. See, we've got some Ontario County with Aspire Hope. Very cool. Western region represent. Let's see here. Just gonna give everyone just a couple more minutes. Sign on, see if anyone else joins us. I guess we can go ahead and get started. See if anyone shows up kind of as we start. So my name's Alex Carpenter. I'm the Western Region Youth Partner with Youth Power. If you came to any of the other presentations that we've done throughout September, you've seen me. So today we've got Charles Anthony Bryce here. He is my counterpart in the Hudson River region, right? Capital District region. And he's doing a presentation today about the BIPOC community, substance use disorder, and juvenile justice, some of the implications and correlations that kind of tie all those three systems together, right? So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to him. I'll be helping him monitor the chat, putting in links occasionally. And if you guys have anything you'd like to add and want to put it in the chat, I can bring that to his attention as well too, okay? So Charles, with that, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. As Alex mentioned, my name is Charles Anthony Rice. I am the Hudson Regional Youth Partner of Youth Power at Families Together in New York State. That is always a mouthful to say. However, what that really means in short is that I am a young person with lived experience. It's a weird transition for me because while I'm a young person, I'm also a little bit older than my counterpart, Alex, and some of our other team. And one of the other benefits I have of being a regional youth partner is that I'm also a father of 5, my youngest being 3, and my oldest will be 17 in a couple of weeks. So I bring a different perspective to the work that we get to do because a lot of times my focus groups consist of my kids and their friends. And so I really enjoy what I get to do every single day. And so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about changing the inevitable. This is going to be an interactive conversation, less than a workshop that you are typically used to being in. I know for myself, it's a Friday afternoon. Number one, one of the things that we believe at Youth Power is nobody wants to be with you on their Friday afternoon. So what I decided, I was like, man, I want to make my Friday afternoon workshop the best possible workshop I can make it. And so what I wanted to do was really make it interactive. I wanted to make it fun. I wanted to have conversation with you. I see that some people are in the chat already, and I really love that. As I mentioned in the chat just a little while ago, I would love it if you have the ability to, if you could turn on your cameras. Again, for those of you who have been in Zoom meetings, sometimes it feels really weird when you're talking to like a bunch of names on a screen. But either way, we're gonna have a ton of fun here. And we're also going to get some really insightful information, and we're also going to have some really good conversation as well. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Perfect. And so, as I mentioned, today we are going to be talking about changing the inevitable. And what that looks like for a lot of us is going to be a little bit different, but we're going to have a conversation specifically about BIPOC youth. For those of you who may not be familiar with the acronym BIPOC, it is a term that is used for Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so we're going to have a conversation about some of the inevitable things that take place when growing up in the BIPOC community. And the BIPOC community isn't necessarily a place, but more of the way of life and a thinking that you have as a BIPOC young person, as well as the unfortunate stigmas that come with being a BIPOC youth. All right. And so I want to have a little bit of fun to start us off. We start every workshop that we do off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So I see that some people are at work. I see that Becky, you are at home. Leslie, it looks like you might be at work still. And so again, this is a Friday afternoon. And I know that you probably have been sitting at that desk all day. Becky, you've probably been sitting there too if you've joined any other Zoom meetings today. This is my third one today. And so what I wanted to do was get us out of our seats a little bit. And so what I want to do is have a virtual scavenger hunt. Have any of you done this yet? All right, perfect. So we're going to have some fun. Robbie, you haven't done one either, and you've been in youth power training. So great. We're going to have a little bit of a virtual scavenger hunt right now. So can everybody see my screen with these different 1 point, 5 point, and 10 point scavenger hunt items? What I want you to do, I'm going to give everyone, let's say 5 minutes. And I want you to take a look at this list, and I want you to go around your office, your house. You can phone a friend, anything that you need to. I want you to try to find as many of the items on this list as you possibly can. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. This is going to be a lot of fun. I had a guy actually pull out spam on one of these that I did. Why he had spam in his house when he's a father and a husband, I do not know, because that is very unhealthy, but he found spam for some reason. But I want you to take about 5 minutes, and I want you to go ahead and find as many of these items on this list as you possibly can. You can feel free to unmute yourself. I want to hear the laughter. I want to hear you talking to your colleagues, everything, to try to find these items. Robbie, get off your computer, go find the items. Alex, go find them.
Let's do this. Sock drawer first. I feel I'm gonna go for some of these big points here. I feel like a sock with a hole is it's really just a matter of going through all the socks, really. I'm sure I've got one.
Yeah, so we have a sock with a hole in it. Those are big ticket items. We have a
Big ticket items. That's my style.
For those of you who are at home, if you have a family member at home with you, you can get a family hug. Little items, things like highlighters, book bags, a can of food, something round, an empty box, little bit of a bigger item, 3 purple things, a fire extinguisher. We're about
I changed my mind with the sock. I've decided I'm not going to tear apart because I have my socks balled up into pairs, and I don't like doing laundry.
Who folds socks, Alex? Nobody folds socks anymore.
I fold socks.
Leslie, I'm sure one of your coworkers has.
Robbie's over there waving his hand. He folds socks. Let's see. All right. Okay. Okay. Daughter's room, stuffed animal. Okay. Let's see here.
Welcome, Julie. Thank you for coming. Right now, we are in the middle of a virtual scavenger hunt. Where did Becky find a fire extinguisher at home? That is so good.
I know my son is a $2 bill somewhere, but I can't find it. So fire extinguisher is where it's at right now.
I am so proud of you for having the fire extinguisher. That's number one.
And highlighter.
Good, there we go.
Team.
Julie, if you're able, if you could turn on your camera for us. We are doing a virtual scavenger hunt right now, having a little bit of fun on a Friday afternoon. As we say all the time at Youth Power, no one wants to spend their Friday afternoon with you. So the least we could do is have a scavenger hunt. How's it going over there, Leslie? I know one of your coworkers has a hole in their sock. I promise. One of them does.
How much time's left?
You have about a minute and a half left. 1 minute, 30 seconds left to find a few more items.
Oh, geez.
One thing I noticed I didn't have is like a paper clip because we don't print anything anymore working from home. So everything's virtual. Robbie's getting intense. He's left the room. I think I like those socks, Robbie. Are those happy socks? Yes. We have about 1 minute left. 1 minute left. If you have anything else that you might be able to find, that counts as a stuffed animal. That does, I will count that as a
Can you
stuffed
tell
animal.
I have boys?
Yes, because it's the poop one, right?
Right.
Charles, does a brick count as a rock?
No, a brick does not count. Why do you have a brick in your home is the question.
Listen, man, I'm doing a lot of construction around the place, getting ready for the baby. I need bricks and stuff, man.
We have about 30 seconds left. Becky, I have a cool one for you because I use emojis. Remember, we went virtual, so I was like, hey, I can't always unmute myself. So I have like emojis and I have my yes and no signs. So I
Perfect.
can answer questions.
Those are awesome.
Somebody told me I should sell them on Etsy, especially with us being completely virtual now.
Yeah.
We have about 8 seconds left.
Oh, geez.
Does Roxy count as a stuffed animal?
No, Roxy does not count as a stuffed animal.
Oh.
If you have your pet, though, feel free to have your pet in the meeting. I love animals. Roxy is about the size of my dog's head, actually. So he may make a guest appearance at some point. I think he's back here taking a nap. We have a Saint Bernard. So he is very large. All right, perfect. So who thinks they have the most points out of everyone? It looks like you guys were going pretty intensely. I saw a fire extinguisher come out at home, which I love. So Robbie, do you have an idea of how many points you have sitting in front of you right now?
I have 3 1-pointers. I
All right.
have 1, 2, 3. I have 3 5-pointers. And then I have multiple socks with like every sock that I own has a hole in it. So do I count 10 points for every sock that doesn't have a hole? Because if so, I think I won.
Okay. So Robbie, it sounds like you have what, like 20 points worth of holy socks in there too?
20. It's 10 points each for a sock with a hole.
I don't think we're doing that. That's not,
Oh,
that's
okay.
an unfair advantage.
All right.
Okay, I need
There we
one sock with a hole.
Okay, well, I got that.
Okay. Anybody thinks they have more points than Robbie? Right now, you don't win anything, but you do get bragging rights for the rest of this workshop.
I have so much stuff on my desk right now. Like I got my cutting board, I got my junk mail, I got some flowers, got my socks, got my hammer. We're locked and loaded.
Paper clip, something round.
Oh,
I
see,
love that you found that paper clip though. So I realized that those are really hard to come by when you work from home.
I
Because
have a
again, like,
well-equipped office.
we're not really printing anything because COVID, you're not really handing paperwork out. So
Mhm.
everything's virtual. So finding a paper clip is a rarity. I think Alex has a unicorn behind him.
I've
I
got 3 5-pointers and 3 1-pointers.
Okay, so you have 18
cat.
points.
Yeah.
Leslie, what do you think you have?
I have 20 points.
Okay, so we have 18, we have 20. So right now, Leslie's winning. Becky, about how much do you have?
I have not as much as the other people. My
Okay,
math isn't working right now.
so right now, Leslie, that's perfectly fine. It's Friday afternoon. Nobody wants to do math anymore. We're over this. It is
True.
almost the weekend. Hopefully none of you work on Saturdays because that would be a really bad reference if I'm saying we're done. So it looks like Leslie might be the winner with 20 points if Alex only has 18.
That's worth it.
So I want to give a round of applause for Leslie. Leslie, you are the winner. You get bragging rights for the rest of this workshop. We do throw shade. That's a youth term that we like to use. So we will make fun of Robbie and Julie and Alex because they did not win. I am a sore winner and a sore loser, so it's not a good combination for me. But I really appreciate everyone for being here and for participating in our scavenger hunt. For those of you who just jumped in, my name is Charles Anthony Rice. I am the Hudson Regional Youth Partner here at Youth Power at Families Together in New York State. As I mentioned to those who have their cameras on, I know it's super weird sometimes to have your camera on, but I would love it if you do have the possibility of turning it on, because it's super weird talking to a screen full of just names. And I wanted to make this training as interactive and as conversational as I possibly could, because it's a Friday afternoon. And I know none of you want to spend your Friday afternoon in a workshop, so I wanted to make it as fun as possible, okay? So if you do have the ability to turn on your camera, I would love it if you could, just so that we can continue having fun in this workshop, okay? Now we're gonna dig into some information, okay? Perfect. So our agenda for today, I'm gonna give a brief introduction. We're going to talk about what this looks like by the numbers. So we're gonna talk about BIPOC youth, the juvenile justice system, and substance use disorder, as well as we will have some room for questions as well if you have any at the end, okay? Feel free to chime in as well as we're going throughout the training, because there will be a lot of information that we're gonna be giving and a lot of conversation questions, and I want us to really participate as much as we can, so feel free to unmute yourself, type anything you need to in the chat as well. Alex, if you can keep an eye on the chat for me, that would be great, okay? Perfect.
Totally.
So as I mentioned, my name is Charles Anthony Rice. Yet again, I am the Hudson Regional Youth Partner of Youth Power Families Together. One of the benefits of being a regional youth partner is I have the ability to talk about my lived experience at work when most people don't get the option to. Most people have to kind of stay to themselves. You know, your life outside of work is kind of your life outside of work. There's not a lot of relationship building in certain atmospheres and certain settings and agencies. That's not something that we believe in here at Youth Power. We really become a big family. And so we want to make sure that we're creating those same settings when we do workshops and trainings too. And so I do have lived experiences within the systems that we work in, which is one of the benefits that I have, and one of the things that I bring to the table as far as skills. So I have lived experience within the juvenile justice system, as well as the mental health system, as well as the substance use and disorder system, as well as the child welfare system. So I have a lot of lived experience, and for a long time, I felt like it was a weight that I carried around on me, but now I realize that it's really hope that I'm actually carrying around with me. Hope for another young person, hope for another family, hope for another person to just be like, man, if he can make it, then I can make it through my situation too. And I just have to keep fighting and moving forward. So with that being said, let's dive right in. So I am a huge movie buff. Anybody here by a show of reaction hands or physical hands like to watch movies? Perfect. So we got a few people that like to watch movies. Julie has like this, like, I don't know if I like movies. So I like horror movies. I know some people don't. I enjoy horror movies. So hopefully this doesn't scare anybody, but I was wondering if you wanted to play a game. Anybody want to play a game? We're going to have lots of games today, okay? But I promise you're going to get some really good information. So we're going to play a game called By the Numbers, okay? So every question that we're going to have, I want you to feel free to, again, unmute yourself, type it in the chat, whatever you feel is the answer, and then we're going to go over those answers and some facts about those answers as well to talk about those inevitable things that our BIPOC youth are dealing with when it comes to the juvenile justice system and substance use disorder, okay? The first question is, African Americans make up what percentage of the youth population in the United States? African Americans make up what percentage of the youth population in the United States? Don't worry, this is multiple choice. Is it A, 16%, B, 22%, C, 31%, or D, 37%? I'll give everyone a couple seconds to go ahead and type in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and give your answer as well. This is going to be one of the least formal yet formal workshops you will ever be a part of. We started off with a scavenger hunt, right? That's typically not what you do in workshops as an adult. So what are we looking at? How many people are looking at, what do we have in the chat, Alex, right now? You're on mute, buddy.
We have got, let's see, I said C, got a handful of D's. Looks like the general consensus is D. I actually didn't realize it was multiple choice and my gut instinct was to blurt out about 30. So when
Okay.
I saw C, I was like, that's the one.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
looks like
So
everyone else is D though.
everyone is looking at about 37% is what we're thinking. So the African Americans make up 16% of the youth population in the United States of America. That's as of the 2019 census. And that's in the United States. Non-Hispanic white youth account for about 52% of the youth population, according to that same 2019 US Census. Now, these statistics are important to know and understand for the conversation we're getting ready to have for the rest of our time together, okay? All right. So, who can tell me what probability means? Like, what is probability? Feel free to unmute yourself, type it in the chat. When you hear the word probability, what does it mean?
The likelihood of something happening or not happening.
The likelihood of something happening or not happening. Will we all agree that's kind of what probability is? Perfect. So this takes us back to everyone's favorite subject, which is math. Sorry if there's anyone who actually liked math that's attending this workshop today. I didn't. But specifically the concept of probability, simply put, is the likelihood, as Becky mentioned, that a certain result will be, that you would get a certain result based on a number of favorable cases in a whole number of cases. All right, so it's basically like based on the whole number, it's the likelihood that you would get something based on how many of a certain thing there are. This is important. Why? Because we just learned that what? BIPOC youth, or African-American youth specifically, make up 16% of the youth population, while non-Hispanic white youth make up about 52%. In other words, the more you have of something, the more likely it should be that that item would be selected, right? Right. So what I would like everyone to do, again, we're going to be super interactive today. So what I would like you to do is I would like everyone to just go ahead and close their eyes really quickly and point your finger at your screen. Close your eyes, point your finger at your screen. And I want you to move your finger back and forth from left to right across your screen at any speed that you see fit. Okay? And I want you to keep doing that until I say stop. Make sure your eyes are closed. And I want you to stop. What color dot did, if you open your eyes, what color dot did you land on?
White.
I heard Leslie say white. Becky, you said white. Julie, you said white.
I actually landed on the brown one, but I
Okay,
was
you
using
landed
my
on the
left
brown
hand
one.
instead of my right hand. So normally I feel like I would have.
Okay, no, that's perfectly fine. So the reason that we did this is because, again, when we look at probability, if non-Hispanic white Americans make up about over 50% and BIPOC youth or African-American youth only make up 16%, it would be more likely. So you're actually more likely to run into a non-Hispanic white American youth than you are to run into a African-American or BIPOC youth. That is just what the probability tells us based on 52% compared to 16%, okay? So this is another good idea of what that probability would look like. And this is important for, again, the rest of the conversation that we're getting ready to have, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is we're gonna have another activity, right? Everybody has seen a coin toss, right? I have a quarter here. Everyone's seen a coin toss. How many sides are on a coin? Two. We have two sides on a coin. So what does the probability of you landing on heads or tails mean when we think about probability? What percentage of a chance do you have of landing on heads? 50%, right? Same thing goes for tails. So what I want you to do right now then is I'm going to flip a coin and I want you to type in the chat an H if you think it's going to be heads or a T if you think it's going to be tails. All right, so I'm going to flip this coin. I'm going to scoot back a little bit. I flipped the coin. Feel free to put in your chat what you think it's going to be. Alex, are you still with me looking at my chat, buddy?
I am. We've got some heads and some tails. It's pretty evenly split.
All right, we're pretty
Now we're
evenly-
getting a majority of heads at this point.
Okay, so we have a majority of heads. I will tell you that the answer is heads. I don't know if you can see that. It is heads. Okay, so we got a majority with heads. I'll do it one more time. We're gonna flip this coin again. Please put an H or a T in there for whether you think it's heads or tails.
All right, mostly tails this time.
So we got mostly tails this time.
Mostly tails, couple heads.
We're looking at another heads. We're at heads. Again. All right. So we got one head, we got two heads right now in our 50-50 shot. I'm gonna do it one more time just to see if we can get something a little bit different. Are we on heads or tails? H or T in the chat.
Seeing some T's, lots of T's.
Lots of
I'm
T's.
feeling like statistically it's about time.
Okay. I
Okay.
love it, right? Statistically, it's about time. That's a great way to transition into what we're talking about too. Statistically, it's about time that we got a tails, right? You'll be happy to know that it actually is tails. So we got a tails. Probability tells us, hey, on our 50-50 shots on the first two, we all ended up with heads. We are like, hey, it's very possible that this next one's going to be tails. Now, again, when we think about probability, when we did the pointing of the dots, a majority of us landed on white dots compared to the brown dot. And then we just did this heads and tails. A lot of us landed on the 8, or we got heads twice, and then we got a tails. But again, there's only 2 options for you to choose from. So it's really not that difficult. Now let's make it a little more difficult. Everybody has played Monopoly before, correct? Now, those Monopoly dice, I feel like every time are a little bit rigged, right? So we've all had the fun of playing with dice. Some of us who are from different neighborhoods, we play with dice for other reasons growing up, but we all see dice. Now, dice have 6 sides, right? So one of the things that I learned after doing a lot of research is that because dice have 6 sides, that means that because it's 1 through 6, that means there's going to be 3 odd numbers and 3 even numbers. And then when you bring another die into the situation, though, you actually increase the probability of you getting a higher number, right? Because now you have more options of getting higher numbers. So you can roll 6 as many times as you would want to, but now you have the opportunity of getting 6 on different occasions because there's more numbers that will add up to 6 compared to what will add up to 1 or 2 or even 3. So the probability of getting a higher number increases because why? You have larger numbers. There are more larger numbers than there are smaller numbers that you have the option of getting because you're now rolling 2 die. Now, the same thing happens when we talk about probability when it comes to the youth that we're dealing with as it relates to BIPOC youth, juvenile justice system, and substance use disorder. Sorry, I skipped over my dice. I was gonna roll them, but we're gonna actually skip past that a little bit, okay? So now we're gonna move on to our next question. BIPOC youth make up what fraction of the incarcerated youth population? BIPOC youth make up what fraction of the incarcerated youth population? Again, this one is multiple choice, so you don't have to take a shot in the dark with it. Okay, so we have 1/5 of the incarcerated youth population, 2/5, 3/5, or 4/5. Feel free to type in the chat whether you think the answer is A, B, C, or D. And I'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and put that in the chat. And Alex, if you can moderate for me
Got
a
a
little bit.
couple C's and a D. I got a B and a D.
Okay.
Okay, so it's looks like D is probably the majority
You
consensus.
said D as in David?
Right.
Okay, so we have about 4/5. Now, what I would love to hear, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, if you chose D, what made you choose D? Especially after learning that African Americans only make up 16% of the youth population. What made you select that they would be 4/5 of the incarcerated youth population? This is a space again, I didn't reiterate, I didn't say this at the beginning, but this is a safe space. So I want us to be able to create this space where we can talk openly and honestly about some of the things that we've heard, maybe even some stigmas that we may have had, different things like that. But why do we, Julie, I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead. Why did you pick 4/5?
Because I've been to like juvenile detention centers, and most of the young people I've seen there are kids of color.
Okay. So that's from lived experiences that you've had within the juvenile justice centers, not that you've been there, but that you've actually been there in real life. You've seen that a majority are of BIPOC, from the BIPOC community. What about you, Becky? I saw you on mute.
Yeah, I chose C, but I was going back and forth between C and D, honestly. And for me too, it's off of lived experience. I spent most of my teen years in juvenile, delinquency centers. And just to be completely transparent, I was often the only white person there. So I was just kind of going off that.
Okay. Leslie, would you like to chime in? Robbie, Len, Sarah, would either of you like to chime in on why you selected a certain answer you did? I see you unmute, Leslie. Go ahead.
I did it wrong. I based it on the percentage of African Americans. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, and what did you select? You selected D?
I selected B.
Okay.
Not thinking of the Hispanics and others.
Yeah, not a problem. You'll see those kind of interchange throughout the workshop, the difference between BIPOC. The reason that we kind of combine BIPOC with the Hispanic and Indigenous people of color, meaning like Native Americans, is because we do know that statistically, Hispanics and African Americans tend to be grouped together because of a lot of these socioeconomic disparities that we tend to have as a culture, and they, upbringings and different things like that. So they tend to be grouped together in those ways. Robbie, I saw you on mute. Go ahead.
I was going to say that, we've seen that there's a war on race, and like BIPOC community is primarily the community that is targeted for anything regards to the justice system, whether they're being like arrested, whether it's stop and frisk in the cities. That's why I led to C, 3 out of 5.
Okay. So what we will see is that is in fact the correct answer. So according to the AmericanProgress.org, BIPOC youth make up 3/5 or 60% of the population of incarcerated youth. Okay, that's a very interesting fact, saying as, again, they only make up, and I'll say we because I am a BIPOC male, we only make up 16% of the population as a whole, as it relates to youth in the United States of America. So one of the fun facts, and it's not even a fun fact, so one of the facts I want you to be aware of is that BIPOC youth are actually 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts, while you are 3 times more likely to actually come in contact with a non-Hispanic white youth, based on the fact that we know that they make up 52% of the youth population as a whole. But the African-American or BIPOC youth are actually 5 times more likely to be incarcerated. So this fact changes a lot about the futures of our youth. Why? Because if we're having very real conversation, we understand kind of what that circle looks like, right? So we have this young person who has now been involved within the juvenile justice system, has been incarcerated. We actually increase the statistics or the probability, right, of them getting involved within the justice system again, whether it be at a later date or when they're older, whether it be 6 months from now or 6 years from now. We actually increase that probability greatly by getting them involved within the juvenile justice system very early. Okay, and this will tie into substance use disorder as well. So I want to just keep you aware of that as well. But these are also facts that I think are important to understand when we're having the conversation about BIPOC youth as well. All right, and so I'm going to throw some numbers up on the screen right now, and I want you to tell me your thoughts and what you think these numbers might be. So we have 66%, 44%, and 55%. 66, 44, 55. These are 3 different numbers. Anybody want to take a shot in the dark at what these numbers might be? That's okay. So the first number, 66%. 66% of youth who have been arrested will become repeat offenders within 24 months. 66%. Nearly 70% of youth who are arrested will become repeat offenders within 24 months. So within a 2-year period from the date that they're released, they will become repeat offenders. The next one is 44%. 44% of repeat offenders are arrested for a felony. So we can go from this young person dealing with different situations, dealing with different traumas, different life experiences. And it can be something as, and again, I don't believe that there's anything that's greater or smaller than any one crime. Like a crime is a crime at the end of the day. You break the law, you break the law ultimately. But knowing that someone can go from stealing a pack of gum to, again, because of the fact that they've been in the system, they actually learn new things. Being someone who's been involved within the juvenile justice system, I am first to let people know that this juvenile justice system did absolutely nothing for me. It was a waste of time. It was a waste of 8 months of my life at 11 years old. And I learned absolutely nothing from it that was of benefit to my life at all. What I did learn is how to hold my own and how to fight a little bit better, because I was a little bit of a smaller, husky kid. And so a lot of people would pick on me, try to take my things from me. So I learned some skills that I needed to be able to, take care of myself outside of that. And I learned that even, down to my shoes and the things that I was able to wear for school and different things like that, even in a juvenile detention facility, people were like, hey, you're poor. And so I was like, hey, I never want to be looked at like that again. So I made some decisions moving forward that I was like, hey, I'm not going to allow anybody to pick on me again. So I'm going to sell a little bit of this. I'm going to make a little bit of that. And we all know that as you start taking on bigger and tougher crimes or breaking different laws, again, your time is going to get a little bit different. You're going to go from those misdemeanors to those felonies really quickly. And then the last one is this 55%. About 55% of juvenile delinquents continue to offend up to age 25. 55%. And so that's another really interesting fact, right? Because of the fact that we see that it went from being a juvenile to now 25 years old. And we know that once you hit that age now, thankfully, due to some of the laws and bills that have been passed, we have the Raise the Lower Age and the Raise the Age campaign that we just have gotten done with promoting and campaigning and advocating for with Families Together in New York State. We can see that they've raised the lower age, and we'll talk about it a little bit further, of the ability to arrest and prosecute young people. And they've also raised the age of a young person basically being able to understand that they've actually committed a crime. And so we'll talk about that a little bit further, but that's 55% up to age 25. We know that after age 18, they're no longer being looked at as juveniles, but now they're being looked at as adults. Regardless of where your brain stopped developing, we all know that your prefrontal cortex actually isn't formed until you're 25 years old, meaning that your ability to actually make conscious decisions, you aren't capable of doing until you're 25. So we're looking at these 16 to 18-year-olds and saying, hey, you've made an adult decision and now you have to go to adult jail even as a child. And one of the things I talk about often in the workshops and trainings and conversations that I've had is that it's very interesting to me how they're kids until they do something wrong. But the moment they do something wrong, it's this young person or this man or some things like that. And so we keep those things in mind because they're kids when they're sweet, right? When they're doing everything we want them to do, when they're following the rules, oh, that kid, that's a nice kid, right? But as soon as we find out there's something wrong, oh man, they're trouble, right? And so we keep those things in mind. And then again, at age 25, they're now going into adult prisons and having to deal with adult situations when they're not equipped to do that. So my question to you is, how did we get here? So what are some of the things that you feel are factors and how we got into the numbers that we just saw? What are some of the things that you think play a role in what we just saw in regards to juvenile delinquency, in regards to African-American and BIPOC youth and their incarceration rate as it relates to and as it kind of balances with the actual number of percentage that they are within the US youth community?
Lack of support.
Lack of support.
Lack of preventative services.
Okay, lack of preventative services, lack of supports. What do lack of supports look like? What do supports look like?
Peers, family peer advocates, therapists.
Okay. It's interesting that you say that, right? Because You said you were a family peer advocate, correct?
I am,
Okay. How long have you been a family peer advocate?
4 years.
4 years. So I can honestly tell you that before I started working for Families Together a year ago, I had no clue what a family peer advocate was.
Me too.
It literally, I had no clue. Would you say that you knew about it before you started working as one?
I didn't even know that it was a thing until I was approached to be one.
Okay.
So
So you had no clue. Becky, what about you? Did you know anything about family peer advocates? Do you know anything about family peer advocacy?
I am one, a new one.
Okay.
And no, I'd never heard of family peer advocacy, and I greatly wish I had when I was going through things with my older kids.
Okay. And how long have you been a family peer advocate?
Just shy of 6 months. I'm
Okay.
new, yeah.
No, perfect. That's not a problem at all, right? I've been working in this field for over 10 years, but in my role, I've only been here for about a year now. I'm going to be a year in December, so it's completely understandable. But again, this is a newer role. Yes, it is a newer role, but let me say this, while the credential aspect of it is newer, the role has kind of been around for a long time, but it's not often something that's talked about. And as you mentioned, Becky, you wish that someone would have informed you of that when you were dealing with things with your own older children,
Mhm.
right? When you were dealing with your kids.
Right.
Leslie, as a parent, would you say that you feel the same way?
oh, definitely, and that was a long time ago.
So
Mhm.
one of the things that I want you to pull from this conversation is, why is it that the family peer advocate or even youth peer advocate services are not talked about more openly within the professional field that we are working in? Right? It isn't until you come across somebody who's doing the work that you're like, oh, family peer advocate,
Mhm.
right? But we deal with doctors, we deal with social workers, we deal with school counselors and different things like that, but nobody brings it up. Why do you think that is?
You want my personal opinion?
Yes, remember, this is inevitable, changing the inevitable. This is a conversation about this. So I want you to be able to talk about it. This is your safe space.
Honestly, because I think that as a family peer advocate, as a mother of a child, you know what I'm saying? You're looked down on. You're not looked up to at all, that of what you've gone through. And the same thing as a child who's going through it becomes a peer. You're not looked at or as being professional. You really aren't. You don't have the education. You don't have the money that I'll say educators have. Okay.
Mhm.
You don't have the money to do what they did, so you're looked at differently.
Okay. Becky, what about you?
I agree with Leslie. I think there's a stigma, I guess, around like the fact that you don't have to have a degree to be a family peer advocate. We don't get social work degrees, we don't get psychology degrees. And I think that's really unfortunate because there's a lot of value in lived experience. I would bluntly say in some instances, maybe even more valuable than a degree, that you learn on paper or whatever. I'm not saying that right, but both are valuable, don't get me wrong, but like I agree with what Leslie said. I think that family peer advocates are seen, from my short experience so far, as kind of a joke. Like, what do we know, so. And then there's a fine line too. Like, you want to, like, sometimes I feel like I want to scream from the rooftops, like, I know a lot of shit, like, you want to like, but you don't want to like make it about you and share every single detail of what you've gone through too. So it's a funny little dance that I think I'm dancing so far, but yeah, there's a lot of stigma.
Okay. Go ahead, Julie.
I'm gonna go on the opposite side here and say that I think a lot of providers are afraid of peers. Because a lot of providers are not doing things that are beneficial, and we're coming in and we're telling them, no, you're wrong.
That's a great perspective. I never thought about it that way.
They don't like that. And honestly, the more peers there are, the less money they're going to make in the long run. And that's my honest opinion.
Okay. I love that. I love that you said that. So, Julie, I know you're from this weird area in Central New York. Where are you from again?
Like Shenango County.
Okay, so you're from Shenango County. I saw someone's from Ontario. Was that you, Becky?
I work in Ontario. I'm from Rochester, though.
You're from Rochester. Okay, so I'm from Syracuse originally.
Okay, yeah.
I know Alex is from the sticks somewhere over in Western New York. Robbie's from Long Island, right? So would you say that you know the neighborhood or the city that you grew up in pretty well? Yeah, like I grew up in Syracuse, and I know for a fact, unless they added new things, which in Syracuse they probably won't, I know for a fact that I can go back home and I can get everywhere I need to go without a GPS. Right? It's just once you get there, like things look a little bit foggy for a second, and then you get home and you're like, oh, I know where this is. I'm good. Right? So what I want you to remember, right, is two things. One, you can't give people directions from a place that you've never been. I've never been to Shenango County. So for me to feel like, now, while I may be able to look things up, right? I can look up all the information I want to on Google Maps, on MapQuest. I know that aged me a little bit, right? We all remember MapQuest. We had to print out your directions. I can look up instructions, right? So we look at that as that book knowledge, right? Can you use it? Is it beneficial? Yes. I do believe that book knowledge, I have a degree, so I understand that book knowledge is beneficial. However, my degree is in English and education with a minor in creative writing. Mind you, I'm not an English teacher at all, nor do I teach creative writing anywhere. I'm a youth advocate. So ultimately, my degree means nothing. So one of the things I was just telling someone the other day, because we see a lot of these jobs that are like, oh, you have to have this type of degree in order to do this. And I was like, you know what if my job required me to have a degree? I had to have a degree in like human resources, social work, something along those lines, right? And I would be like, man, I wouldn't be able to do my job. But then I thought about it. Even if you have that piece of paper, if youth and families don't like you, it means nothing, right? You would get fired because families and you don't want to deal with you every day. And so what I want you to remember is, one, you can't give directions to a place that you've never been to. And two, going there can't tell been there how to get there. Going there can't tell been there how to get there. Now, were your journeys rocky being parents? I'm sure they were. My journey right now of 5-piece spicy is what we call our kids. It's a crap show at times. I still try to figure it out. I've never been a father of a 17-year-old boy before. So every single day is a lesson for me to try to figure out what is going on in his world. For those of us who have kids, which I think a lot of us on this call do, it's interesting, right? To try to figure all these things out. The same thing goes with the people and the families that we get to work with, the young people, the families that we get to work with in our communities. Sometimes it's just about trying to figure it out. But the good part is you've actually dealt with a lot of the situations that they are going through. You know what it's like to try to find supports and resources and not know where to look and where to dig, but then you finally made a phone call and somebody was actually able to guide you in the right direction. You know what that looks like. Does it mean that your story looks exactly the same? No, but that's how we mentioned, that's how we got here. These lack of supports, these lack of respect for our youth peers and our family peers, different things like that, that fear that they have because it's unknown. It's like, I can't believe I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this degree and this person comes in and all they did was live life and the family actually relates to them better. And it's because it's exactly that, you're relatable. And so that's how we got here. And so it's that lack of supports, that lack of community resources and preventative services, because we tend to be, as a nation, as a community, very reactive in our response to things rather than proactive about them. And so I think that's really important to understand. That's how we actually got here. And so we're going to continue on. So we'll have our next question really quickly. So based off of our conversation that we had, what percentage of people living in high poverty neighborhoods identify as being BIPOC? So what percentage of people living in high poverty neighborhoods identify as being Black, Indigenous, people of color? Again, this is multiple choice, so we're gonna take our time here. No shots in the dark. So we have 37%, 51%, 62%, or 73%. Feel free to type your answer in the chat. Terry, thank you for joining us today. We're glad that you are here. Feel free to type your answer in the chat on what percentage of people living in high poverty neighborhoods identify as being BIPOC. Feel free to type your answer in the chat, whether A, B, C, or D. Also, feel free to unmute yourself if you care to share verbally.
Got 2 B's, 3 B's, 3 C's, and an A, it looks like so far, Charles.
Okay, so we have a few B's, an A, a couple of C's. Okay. So all that being said, the answer is 62% come from high poverty neighborhoods. 62% of people living in high poverty neighborhoods identify as being Black, Indigenous, people of color. According to the 2019 National Equity Atlas, BIPOC make up 62% of people living in high poverty neighborhoods. With an increase in poverty comes an increase in crime, as we know. So not the needs increasing, but the needs of the family of an impoverished community are the same, right? So if we think about, everyone has the same basic needs: food, shelter, water, clothing, those types of things. So the needs don't change, but it's the ability to meet those needs that change when it comes to those higher poverty areas compared to those upper middle class communities. So what is missing actually is the ability of to have resources in order to meet those needs. Again, we look at things like prior to COVID, we look at like the ability to obtain like food stamps or public assistance, right? So we know that, again, if for some reason someone needs to go on emergency assistance, public assistance, something like that, if you've never been inside of that building or inside of that office, it is a very chaotic place to be, number one. And before COVID, I don't know what it's like after COVID. Before COVID, though, it is an all-day occurrence. It is you taking the day off and you're going to sit in this office pretty much from 9 a.m. when the doors open because you want to get a good spot. So you're probably there around 8:30 waiting to get a good spot in line. And then you're there pretty much all day till about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon before your number's called most of the time. And you're going through this process, right? But if you think about it, if someone is actually working and just genuinely needs that assistance, what is the likelihood that you're going to be able to get the time off of work that's needed without taking time away from, hey, if I have a sick child, I can't use my sick time to go down and get public assistance, right? So we run into these areas. And so those needs like food, clothing, shelter, et cetera, it makes it very difficult. So currently in New York State, there is a graduation rate of about 77%. That breaking down to be about 87% of a graduation rate for non-Hispanic whites and 63% of BIPOC youth. Now, again, when we look at this, we also know this, and the reason that this is important is because we also know that the schools within those high poverty neighborhoods tend to be less successful academically. So we tend to find graduation rates of under 50% in a lot of those schools, with them drastically dropping to a lower percentage when we look at those graduation rates of Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? So if you're from one of the better neighborhoods, you tend to get a better education. Schools tend to not be as overly populated, or if they are populated by a significant amount, you tend to have the teachers and staff that are required or necessary in order to be able to teach those young people accurately. The reason that these numbers are important is why? Why do we feel that these numbers are important? To understand the poverty rates, the ability to get a good education, academics, and things like that. Why are these numbers important to us? You can feel free to unmute. Why are these numbers important to the conversation we're having?
They're like determinant factors on like having success later in life.
That's a great one. So determining factors on having success later in life. We also know that it determines how much a family actually makes moving forward, right? Because if all you have is a high school diploma, you tend to make significantly less than those who may have a college degree. So according to the Equity Policy Institute, in 2009, the median household income for a white family was $76,057. Compared to that of a Black family, which was only $46,073. So we're looking at about $30,000 almost of a difference in income. But guess what? The needs haven't changed. There are still needs there, but the ability to meet those needs has drastically changed because of the inability to make more money. The reason we don't make more money is because, again, we tend to look at this fact that 62% of people living within these high poverty neighborhoods are Black, Indigenous people of color. So now we live in these impoverished neighborhoods. We get these lack of academic success from our young people because, again, now our school districts aren't paying as much as those more affluent neighborhoods. So now our children aren't getting as good as an academic future to guarantee their success and their ability to make more money to be able to provide for their families. Again, this is important. Why? Because Alex mentioned just a second ago, this can actually determine what you're going to be doing moving forward. This determines, hey, when we know that there's an old saying that more money, more problems, but we all have been at that place where we're like, man, if I just had a little bit more money, things would be a little bit better. Right? So it's like, and if I could just make a little bit more, it wouldn't be so much tech to tech, right? We wouldn't have to really have that drop in our stomach when we get our paycheck and then we're trying to figure out our bills and things like that and determine, okay, well, now here's another stressor because I realized that for some reason this month, there's a little bit less than I'm bringing in than what I'm putting out, even though my things have never changed. My outcome hasn't changed, nor has my income changed, but I don't have enough to really make ends meet right now. And so we look at that as being very important. That those high poverty neighborhoods are about 62% BIPOC. So why do you think that is? Why are those high poverty neighborhoods a majority being Black, Indigenous people of color? Why do you think that is? Feel free to chime in whenever.
What was the question again, Charles?
Why do you think that the impoverished neighborhoods or those high poverty neighborhoods tend to be 62% approximately of BIPOC families?
Discriminatory banking, lending, and mortgage practices?
That's a great one. That's like redlining.
Yes.
We then come into the conversation of systemic racism.
I was gonna say racism. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to racism, systemic, yeah.
Yep, it comes to those cultural biases and those stigmas that come with those things, because we know that based on systemic racism, again, this doesn't mean necessarily that you're looking at this as I'm not going to hire you because you're Black, right? It's not this, Confederate flag, this rebellious, radical party thing. It's more of like, hey, there are just some things that we have kind of picked up as we go on. And I say we, because one of the things that, a lot that happens a lot in Black communities or in communities in general is that there's this thing of like, oh, well, there's a lot of people of color or Black people that we know we can look at it and be like, oh, well, there are white people who are racist against Black people, but then there's also racism within our own communities, right? There's this idea that, lighter skinned people have it better than darker skinned people. There's different things like that. If you're from a certain neighborhood or you make a certain amount of money or you work a certain place, there's stigma and racism that comes into play with that as well. And so when we look at those things like systemic racism, we look at the fact that we can have two students from very similar schools with very similar degrees or academic backgrounds and different things like that. However, one of them will get a better opportunity at being successful and getting picked for a job, even though their resumes are pretty much identical, simply because of the name that's put on the resume, right? Alexander Johnson will get a job before Jamal Johnson every time. Why? Because this name just looks better, right? A name like Becky compared to a name like Shawana will look a lot different on an application, even though they can be identical. Now, what happens is now Alexander can make $80,000 a year, But because of Jamal's name being Jamal Johnson, and this is Alexander Johnson, Jamal Johnson doesn't get picked. And now Jamal is maybe making about 70,000 or 60,000, sometimes even 40,000, right? Depending on where he can actually find a job. And so those things are things that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at the fact that, okay, now because I can't afford this, being in an area like I live in here in the capital region, there's areas like what we call like Clifton Park, where it's like, houses are going for like $400,000 and $500,000. Now, the school district is a very desirable school district, but someone who's working, a regular 9-to-5 job, making about $40,000, $50,000 a year, may not be able to afford a $500,000 home. But what does that mean? Simply because I can't afford a home in that area means that I cannot send my child to a better school. So I have to send my child to the school in their neighborhood, which is a neighborhood that I can afford to live in with my family. But because I can only live in this neighborhood, my children now get this as their academic futures, because now they're maybe not getting that same type of academic instruction that you would get at one of those more affluent schools and one of those more upper to middle class neighborhoods. Does that make sense? Perfect.
In Saratoga, so even just the difference between Saratoga and Schenectady is like night and day.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Now, they have about the same number of students. However, the graduation rate changes drastically. But why is that? Now, I will tell you
money is another issue too.
Yep, money is a big thing. There's also this idea and understanding that, guess what? When you look at even their demographics within their school, Shenandoah School District in like a Saratoga County is like 97% white.
Yeah.
And then you look at a place like Troy High or Albany High or Schenectady High, when they tend to be more of about 50 to 60% African American. However, you look at this, now you look at the difference between this 96% graduation rate at a Shenandoah High School, or you look at this now 50% graduation rate for this Schenectady, Troy, or Albany High. So we look at those disparities, and those are very real things. But then we think about the fact that, oh man, who's helping this young person at home with their homework to ensure that they have the correct answer? Most of the time we can look at it and in reality say it's probably not a parent. Why? Because it's very likely, and again, this isn't throwing stigma, it is very likely that that young person's parent didn't graduate from college. So they have the same level of degree as their child, which is my child's a senior in high school. And guess what? I only went past my senior year in high school. Does it mean that you don't have the ability to learn things as you go? No, but we're looking at those things and their ability to even have financial success. I know as a Black man, there was never a conversation with me and my caregivers, whether it be my mother or my grandmother at certain times. I never had a conversation about budget. I never had a conversation about finance. So what ended up happening was, as I got older and I was able to make decisions, I didn't know how to make them, which again, now puts me in this poverty realm because I made poor decisions growing up. Do I live in poverty now? No, but it's not because I was given those skills and tools as to, hey, this is how you save money, which those are conversations that people, whether it's an actual conversation that's had or it's something that's shown through action in other non-Hispanic white homes.
Or even schools providing that information. Like, I feel like the more affluent schools help kids with stuff like that, when really there may be more of a need in schools that, don't have the same resources as the affluent communities,
Correct. And so we'll be able to talk about that in a little bit as well, because we'll get to another space where we'll kind of talk about what we can do and what this looks like for us moving forward. Next question. What percentage of juvenile justice involved youth reported substance use within 6 months of being arrested? We have 23%, 54%, 60%, or 77%. So what percentage of juvenile justice involved youth reported substance use within 6 months of being arrested? So whether it was 6 months after or 6 months before they had some type of substance use. Feel free to put your answers in the chat. Alex, what we're looking like there, man?
Looks like a couple C's, a B, 2 D's, kind of an even spread.
Okay, couple C's, 2 D's, kind of an even spread. So the answer is actually 77%. 77% of juvenile justice involved youth reported substance use within 6 months of being arrested. So according to an article in Addiction Science and Clinical Practices, they did report that juvenile justice statistics say that 58% of adults who have been in state prisons and 63% of people who have been sentenced to jail have substance use disorders. And again, why is this information important? Because of what we talked about earlier, right? Because now we look at this disparity between how many youth of color are actually in juvenile justice facilities, their likelihood of being repeat offenders or having additional offenses as they get older, and actually those turning into felonies. Now, because that majority of those adult prisoners is African American, we now look at this number being a majority of African Americans because the increase in numbers. Does that make sense? Perfect. So reports from the U.S. Department of Justice found that 77% of criminal justice involved youth reported substance use, mainly marijuana, in the past 6 months, and nearly half of the male and female justice detainees has a substance use disorder. And again, this is important to understand because, again, the majority, 3/5, so if we look at half of that population being BIPOC, and then we look at, half of that population reporting that they have a substance use disorder or being diagnosed with a substance use disorder, with 60% of them being BIPOC, we now have an increase of BIPOC youth with substance use disorders because of the increase that they have the probability of getting involved with those substances as they're dealing with the juvenile justice system and the adult justice system as they age. And then we have this number, 40 to 60%. So according to the American Addiction Centers, 40 to 60% of addictions are caused by genetics, including the impact of one's environment on gene expression. Including the impact that it has on gene expression. So we understand that, again, this is going to be a very important number to understand because now we have these impacts of, okay, now we have these young people within the juvenile justice system. Now we have these young people now having these environments and this socioeconomic background. So now we increase the probability of them getting involved with substance uses and substance use disorder being a diagnosis that they are diagnosed with. And so we understand that there's a double-edged sword of addiction, okay? And so we see here that substance, when it comes to substance use poverty, right, can increase the exposure to substance and substance use within a community. We see that it can increase the acceptance of substance use by members of that community. And it can cause stress, leading to the need to find alternative ways of dealing with stress, anxiety, or depression based on one's current situation, which we talked about Alex mentioning earlier, which is like, man, these different stressors that we feel from maybe not having enough money, these different stressors that we feel from maybe not feeling adequate enough to be able to assist our children with their homework because of our educational background, different things like that, those cause additional stresses that then lead us to say, okay, now we need to turn to alternatives to try to deal with those stresses, anxieties, and depressions. But then we see that that's a double-edged sword because with those things, we see this idea of addiction and saying that there's an increase of the likelihood that a person will have problems getting, performing at work, which can lead to job loss and lower income. So then we have this double-edged sword. So it's like, man, I go to this thing to try to relieve myself of these things, and now I perform poorly at work, which then causes me to make less money or possibly lose my job. We also see the loss of jobs due to being fired can make it more difficult to find new employment. So now we struggle in these areas as well. Now we're dealing with additional stresses on top of what we were trying to combat through substance use, as well as the difficulty finding employment can lead to increase in stress, anxiety, and depression. So we've just created this cycle over and over again. We try to combat it with doing certain things, and then we just build on top of that because of our inability to perform and possibly losing our jobs and different things like that. So with all of that, I want you to also hear a little bit about what's being done to combat these disparities. So we have organizations like Oasis, which is the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. It's actually one of the nation's largest substance use disorder systems of care, with approximately about 1,700 prevention, treatment, and recovery programs. It operates 12 addiction treatment centers as well. So that's the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, that's Oasis. We also have SAMHSA, and that's the national hotline for SAMHSA. It is a free, confidential, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365-day a year treatment, referral, and information service center for individuals and families facing mental and/or substance use disorders. And that is a number for them as well, for that helpline. We also have Oasis Clubhouses. So clubhouses provide a restorative, non-clinical environment for young people whose lives have been disrupted by addiction. It also allows the ability for young people to connect with others that may be in recovery, as well as building a core of peer-driven supports and services that help young people progress in their recovery by encouraging a drug-free lifestyle. So again, they're around people that are like them, kind of like we talked about a little bit earlier, where it's like, it's hard to tell somebody how to get to a place that you've never been to yourself. Right. And so these young people can build relationships that they're both going in the same direction as well as the Raise the Age and Raise the Lower Age. Raise the Age New York is a campaign that advocates for state and local implementation of a law that was passed in 2017 that raises the presumptive age of criminal responsibility from the age of 16 to 18. And then we have the Raise the Lower Age, which is a bill that was recently passed that raises the age of the arrest and prosecution of children as young as 7 within New York State from the age of 7 to 12. So that's one of the bills that was just recently passed. We increased that age from being 7 to 12 years old. So what can we do, or what can you do? What are some things that you can think of as an individual or agency to be a part of the solution that we of the disparity that we just saw within what we learned? What are some things that you can do to be a part of the solution?
Spread awareness.
Spread awareness. It's a good one. What are some others? Can you think of anything, Becky? Leslie?
I was going to type, but be willing to have like uncomfortable conversations.
Yes, that is a good one. That was actually what this training was called initially. It was called Uncomfortable Conversation. Because this isn't something that a lot of people talk about openly, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things that we can do as individuals or agencies?
Leslie and Terry have put some stuff in the chat too. Leslie mentioned education and trainings like this, and Terry Johnson mentioned like open communication.
Those are both great ones. Yes, I agree with all of those. And as Becky mentioned, it's about having these uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes we need to really look at ourselves as individuals and say, hey, what am I doing or not doing that's maybe adding to or subtracting from this disparity? What am I doing? What stigmas do I carry? What biases may I carry around this same topic? Do I clutch my purse a little bit differently when I'm around a group of people who don't look like me? Like different things like that, right? And sometimes it's like it's not really thought about. It's just, a knee-jerk response, for lack of better terms. It's one of those things that it's like, man, maybe I do feel uncomfortable, and that's perfectly fine. But understanding that sometimes it's that concept that we learned growing up, right? You can't judge a book by its cover, right? It's that same concept because, and I'll just use me as a perfect example, right? Outside of this Zoom community right now, outside of, being in this room and you knowing who I am and having the ability to meet me outside and on like a regular sidewalk or in a neighborhood, I may look a little bit intimidating to you, right? And it's not saying that it's anything, you have anything against people of color, you have anything against men, but I often tell my kids, I am a walking stereotype a lot of times. I'm a very large, I'm 240-pound Black man with dreadlocks. I'm covered in tattoos. Like, I tend to wear my hair down and sometimes in my face, and I wear my clothes a little bit baggier and different things like that. So there can be some stigma and some bias that comes with that. And that's okay, right? But it's understanding that, man, once I get the opportunity to know some people and understanding like, man, I can't judge a book by its cover because this could look a lot different for someone else given, different circumstances. And so we understand those things and really looking at what can we do as individuals to make sure that we're helping to be we're a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions for me? Any comments, concerns?
This was an awesome training, Charles.
Thanks, Robbie.
It was.
Really, thank you so much.
My hope is that your Friday from 1 to 2:30, it's just like, man, it was worth it. I'm glad that I attended. I'm glad that I got a chance to kind of hear this. You don't feel like you wasted any of your time. Please feel free to reach out to me as well as we come to the end of this workshop. As I mentioned, my name is Charles Anthony Rice. My contact information is on the slide that you are seeing right now that I'm sharing with you. Alex will also be putting a survey in the chat for you to be able to provide feedback as well if you have any questions, comments, or concerns as well about this training or workshop. And I appreciate you having me. And I will turn this part over to Alex.
Thanks, Charles. Again, if we could just give Charles a hand, a virtual clap. He really nailed it today. I really appreciate everything you do. So like Charles said, I put the link to a survey to tell him how awesome he is in the chat a couple times. You see it, click. It's not too unbearable. I want to bring kind of Charles and Lynn's attention to each other for a second. I don't know if you saw that, Charles, but she asked if you travel to present at youth groups. Yes, we do, depending on where exactly in New York State you're located, either Charles or myself, throughout the different regions. So we're funded by the Office of Mental Health. So we've got New York split into 5. I cover Jamestown to Auburn-ish area. Julie covers Syracuse towards Albany in the North Country. Charles himself covers like the Hudson region, like cluster there, right until you get to Long Island, and then New York City is its own region just because it's so big. So depending on where you are, please get a hold of me, put it in the survey if you want to. Get a hold of Charles. You saw the email. We can figure out which region you're from and do all sorts of presentations. That's kind of like our thing.
Mhm.
So does anyone have any other final questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, as long as they're constructive, anything like that? No? Well, it was really great having you guys all here. I really appreciate those of you who joined today. And if you joined any of the other ones, I obviously appreciate that too. Please fill out the evaluation form I put in the chat if you need any help. Me and Charles will be sticking around in this digital space for a moment to help anyone fill out the evaluation if they're having some tech issues. But other than that, I think that's all we've got for you today. And thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend.